was out weeks ago for a bit of light reading.
This is light.
Every smart person I know reads a lot, and they say every smart person they know reads a lot. So clearly there is something about reading that makes you smart. However, in my experience, reading alone does not make you smart, because if you don't do anything after reading a book, you're just going to forget what you learned. Take a moment and think about it. What's the last book you read but didn't do anything afterwards? And how much do you actually remember what you learned from the book? Probably not much. So what are those smart people doing differently? There must be something they do to get the most out of reading. What I realized is that they think it through. After reading a book, they take some time to ponder what they just read.
Thought you were reading.
I was. Now I'm thinking about what I read.
Why is this process so important? Because when you're reading, you're just following the author's mental process. In other words, they are doing your thinking for you, which makes you feel you understand the text when in fact you don't. So how can we get out of this illusion and maximize your learning from books? In my opinion, there are 3 steps in the process of reading. The first step is reading while highlighting. Just highlight any sentence or paragraph that resonates with you. At this stage, I just highlight every sentence that I want to think about later or use for my writing. But I guess everyone does this already. However, the problem is most people stop at this step. They don't do anything with the highlights and just move on to the next book, which I think is such a waste. Although some people use a service like Readwise. In case you don't know about Readwise, it's an app that sends you a daily email with the highlights you made on Kindle. That way you get to review your highlights regularly. But I would say this is a dangerous study method because it only promotes the mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect refers to a psychological phenomena where people tend to refer things merely because they're familiar with them. A similar principle applies to rereading. The moment you become familiar with something, you start to believe you also understand it, even though you actually don't. So whenever you get a daily email from Readwise and reread your book highlights, it only makes you feel like you're getting smarter. This is why using Readwise in isolation is not useful, because it only gives you a false sense of understanding. So if rereading your highlights doesn't work, what should we do with them? This leads to the next step. Take notes and write about what you read to distill your highlights into core insights. This is probably the most important step to internalize the knowledge you consumed. You can use a note-taking method like Zettelkasten in this step to make the best notes. If you want to know more about this Zettelkasten method, please watch my previous video about it. Without taking notes, reading is useless, no matter how many books you read. You want to look at the highlights you made and write about what you learned in your own words. It's very important to write it in your own words instead of just copy and pasting, because it forces you to think the idea through and understand it. This is part of the reason why writing is a superpower. It improves your thinking. Personally, I use an app called Rome Research to take notes, but you can use whichever app you like to make notes, such as Evernote, Notion, Obsidian, or Remnote. The final step is to review your notes regularly. Most people don't do anything after making their notes, but you need to review your notes constantly so you can learn from it over and over again. It's also important so you can develop your ideas and insights further. In my opinion, your notes are never complete. They're like plants and trees. You're supposed to develop and cultivate your ideas trees over time, but you cannot do that without reviewing your notes regularly. So make it a habit to review at least one note every day. Just open your notes-taking app, explore your previous notes, and see if you can add a new insight or find a new connection to another idea. So this is a process of reading, but if you want to go even further, there's actually a secret step, that is, create. After repeating this reading process for a while, you have a bunch of notes in your hands. Why don't you share them with other people? It'd be a shame to keep this valuable knowledge just to yourself. You may think your notes are useless, but I can guarantee there's always someone who will find your knowledge useful. By sharing your work online, you can also get feedback from people which you can use to develop your ideas even more. Also, it lets you build your audience and attract new opportunities and people for you. It really is the best way to build your network and personal brand. All you have to do is to take a look at your notes and assemble them in a logical and coherent way. That's actually the beauty of this system. When you already have a bunch of notes with you, writing is more like assembling rather than starting from a blank page. It becomes much easier. So just write about what you learned from books using your notes and share it in your blog, YouTube, or your newsletter. In summary, I talked about why reading while highlighting is not enough to internalize the knowledge you consumed, and the 4 steps of reading that are reading, taking notes, reviewing, and sharing. If you have any question or want to connect with me, feel free to send me a message on Twitter. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!